So what I want to do today is I want to talk about some of the common limiting beliefs that I see women who I work with face. And I want to say that I have worked at this point with, probably a couple of hundred women in workshops, in trainings. I've worked with over 40 women one-on-one coaching. And so I have seen a lot, and I've seen a set of patterns that seem to repeat over and over and over again. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to share some of those common limiting belief patterns that I see. I'm going to share what they sound like in your head, right? How do you know if you have them? And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about, well, what do you do about them, right? Because wouldn't it be terrible if I was like, yeah, your brain is a terrible place to be. Okay, see you later. Have a nice day. All right. So let me dive in. And I just want to share a quick word about why limiting beliefs, right? Why does this matter? Why am I focusing on this? A few hours ago, I went back and I listened to one of the earliest products that I created for Build Yourself, which was a 5-day confidence building course. And so I had people going in and meeting their inner critic and understanding some of the ways the inner critic holds them back. There's lots of ways that critic holds you back. It keeps you from addressing issues that are important to address. It keeps you silent when you need to speak up. It keeps you aiming lower. It keeps you, saying, oh, I don't know if I should ask for that. I don't know if I should negotiate. And so when I first started teaching Build Yourself, inner critic work was a big part of it. But what started to happen, especially as I started to work with more women, on a deeper one-on-one basis, so doing individual coaching, was that I started to see that there weren't just these kind of habits, but these habits were sometimes part of a much, much bigger narrative. So, that narrative, and it's different for different people, but you probably have one of the few flavors that I'm going to talk about today. When you know what that narrative is, then you start to see all of the ways that it's showing up and it's preventing you from being the best you or from putting yourself forward. So a couple of the ones that I've seen. Number one, I'm not a good blank. I'm not good at budgets. I'm not good at numbers. I worked with someone who was a business owner for many years, who started her practice as kind of an escape plan, because the firm that she was working at, and many of the firms at the time, were not great places to have the flexibility to be a parent. And so she went out and she started a practice, and she'd been working in that practice for a number of years. But years later, she still had this mindset: I'm not a good businesswoman. I'm not good at X. It comes up a lot on things that we associate with men. So we tend to associate men with running businesses, with the numbers. This happened to me actually a few years ago when I was still doing design consulting work. I was the lead consultant on a proposal, and I needed to put together a proposal. And I found myself, I'd never put in a budget on the proposal. I found I'd never really done a budget like that. I wasn't sure how to do it. I wasn't sure how to organize it. I wasn't sure how do you translate from people's pay rates into a scope of work. And so there were kind of two paths in retrospect that I could have seen. One is I could have very proactively reached out to my network and said, hey, I'm working on this project, never done something of this scope. Can I see some past examples that you've done? And I've worked to build a lot of know, like, and trust factor between me and my business wing men and wing women. So I've got a great network of people who are willing to share with me. But instead, what I did was I got really nervous about it. And I ended up I'm seeing some folks smiling because it's like kind of shameful to admit, like, your empowerment coach struggles too. But hey, we all struggle. And I think the first step is actually naming it. So instead, I sat on it for a while and I got nervous about it. And I ended up trying to get one of the more experienced members of my team. I was like, you do the budget. You do the budget. You do the budget. And what ended up happening, creepy voice, creepy cartoon character voice. What ended up happening was that the budget got done, but the budget wasn't actually tied to the strategy, which I was putting together. And the budget was also, it was kind of simple. It was like, okay, let's put some hours on this. Let's put some hours on that. What's your pay rate? And then, it really wasn't brain science, but I had been getting so, like for me, it symbolized something that I'd never done before. And I think cut to the heart of my own insecurities around being a business owner and figuring out a lot of things on my own. So I'm not a good X, right? Sometimes we walk around with these labels that we've given ourselves. And not only are those labels not helpful, right? But those labels sometimes prevent you from doing what's right for the project or doing what's right for the client. So that's limiting belief number one. Limiting belief number two is I found the best that I can get. So I work a lot with women who are mission-based. A lot of women who I work with have a commitment to values, social values, and that might be just wanting to make their company a better place to work for women and for people of color, or that might be, bigger social impact values. They're trying to shift their company or maybe even their practice, right? They're running a social impact design practice. I think the majority of people actually do have missions and values that they stand for. And I think a lot of us are looking for ways to integrate that into what we do to have a more full experience of working. So I found the best that I can get. It's not always about social values, but it oftentimes shows up in social values. I'll give an example. So I worked with a woman who had a job in social impact design and was trying to figure out, what do I do next? We were trying to figure out her next level. She was in my next level coaching program. And what we found was that she was in a great role where she had potential to make a lot of impact, but she saw this kind of door, right? She saw this almost like it was almost kind of like it's almost like a glass ceiling, but she couldn't even see beyond it, right? It was opaque, right? She saw this kind of end of the line. And when we really explored why that end of the line in that company, part of it was that she just felt like jobs in her field jobs doing socially impactful design were so scarce that there was no way that this job was going to evolve into something else. And, part of it was also that she was promoting values that were new to her company. And so there was this part of her that felt like she was working on borrowed time, that she wasn't going to be able, at a certain point, she would go as far as she could. And then she was really nervous that there'd be nowhere else for her to go. Now, I've seen this happen not just with impact, but with money. So I worked with a woman who was working in a great job ostensibly, but a job that had evolved into a place where there weren't such great working conditions anymore. And maybe she was also hitting her limit where she'd been implementing other people's visions, and now she wanted to be actually leading and creating visions. But she had this idea that this was she'd been so lucky to find this job, right? This job was, kind of one of those rare gems, one of those needles in a haystack that, there was no way that there was a better job out there. And so she was resigned in this position that, really wasn't serving her, but kind of deeply believing there's nothing else out there. Now, this happens a lot when you've had an experience job searching in a bad economy. So if you've tried to job search and there's only been closed doors, right? If you work in the architecture and design field, that field is pretty cyclical. So sometimes there's a lot of work and, you could switch jobs like that. Sometimes, firms are laying people off and there are closed doors. And a lot of women who I work with had a bad experience in the last recession trying to get a job and having a hard time getting one. And so some of these mindsets, right, these moments where we faced more scarcity, we can bring them with us in the rest of our jobs and in our careers, and we can get to the point where we see that storyline, which isn't true anymore, we see it everywhere. So a lot of people hire me because they know that they're not happy. They know that there's something that's missing, and they believe that the magic answer is out there, and then I'm going to give it to them. And sometimes the magic answer is out there because sometimes we get stuck in our own narratives, and I'm outside of your narrative, and I'm also working with women in architecture, design, affordable housing. I'm working with women who are photographers, who are arts administrators, and so women in tech. So I see a much broader perspective than you do. But A lot of the time, it's actually not about a magic answer. It's about starting to see more nuance in your own situation. So, we looked at this role and we said, okay, well, it pays a lot and it's a great fit, but is there more out there? And one of the things we revealed is that it might be the best fit at the level that she was at. But if she was going to get to the next level of actually running programs and running visions and, being in charge of a much larger scope, there was actually a lot more opportunity, and opportunity that would also come with the kind of pay rate that she wanted to stick at. And so what happens sometimes is we get really stuck in these narratives and these stories. And no matter how many awesome, tools you have, right? Like I've got like a really fun like cover letter Mad Libs that if you're job searching, it's one of my coaching tools, right? Or, a script for pulling in new clients. But no matter how many cool, nifty tools you have to get the job done, if your mindset is limited, there's only so far that you can go. The woman who I mentioned who, felt like there was so much scarcity around doing social impact work, one of the things we realized was that we actually looked at how other people had brought outside agendas into her organization and how they'd managed to really build them into platforms. And while it was different than her agenda, we realized, well, if they can do it, well, maybe you can too. So we made a plan. We developed a North Star vision, a next level vision. I call it a North Star vision because the North Star, it's like light years away. But if we don't, fire up our rocket ship and start heading in that direction now, if we wait to figure it all out, then we're not actually going to make progress. So we created a North Star vision, and excuse my language here, of going balls out towards leading on the values she supports in that company. New position. What would it look like? We actually created a position for her in our minds of what it would look like. We started to look at what the work she was doing would look like if it was a department. And then we started to look at then all the nifty tools, like how do you advocate for yourself? How do you translate between your value and the language that someone else understands? What are the key milestones that people who are crafting visions tend to achieve? And then how do you orient your career path to do that? We can do all of that stuff once we've set that high goal. One of the women who I've worked with, Barbara Nazarevich, she's a landscape architect at Stantec. She told me once, I'd rather shoot for the stars, and if I hit the moon, like that's still pretty good too. So I think what a lot of us do is we're afraid to set big, bold goals because we're afraid we won't hit them. We're afraid that we're not worthy of them. We've maybe had what's called goal trauma. We've tried to reach a goal before and we haven't achieved it. And what I think we need to do is we need to get a little bit more fluid and playful around how we set goals. I help people design fake futures for themselves, right? A fake future might be, I'm going to build this thing into a department. I'm going to be the director of XYZ. And that fake future, first of all, oftentimes can actually become a real future, right? It feels fake to you at the moment that you're creating it because you're like, all my scarcity and fear, like I can't, what if I get disappointed if this doesn't happen? But that fake future oftentimes becomes the reality when you're willing to go for it and to take your foot off the shore and to really push for it. And number two, sometimes that fake future ends up being fake because it's actually not even as great as the real future that starts to emerge as possible when you start going for something that's more ambitious. Okay, so that's a second limiting belief. Okay, so a third limiting belief, and this one's a tricky one because it requires a lot of nuance, is I'm a victim of my circumstances. And, I think a lot of us don't want to think, it's like, I don't think that way. I don't think that I think that way, but I can't tell you how often I find myself I just moved to New York City and there's lines everywhere and I'm like, why are all these people in my way? And why is it mornings are not the best time for me. And I go outside and I have to wait in lines and I'm thinking who are all these people? And why hasn't the universe been designed for my benefit? I don't know if anyone else ever has that feeling. Mornings are, don't hang out with me. Don't hang out with me in the morning. So actually do hang out with me in the morning because it helps me gain a little bit more perspective on the fact that I am not the center of the universe. And I would really appreciate that. So the way this comes up, the way I see this come up and the way I see this get women stuck is that women face real bias in their careers, real bias. Women are not given the same opportunities that men are. We know that men tend to be promoted based on their future potential, whereas women tend to be promoted on the basis of their past accomplishments. That comes from a 2011 study by the group Catalyst, which showed that we tend to kind of think differently about what men and women are capable of, and we make our decisions based on past data for women and kind of future potential for men. A lot of that has to do with the fact that it's easier for us to see men in leadership roles because we see men in leadership roles. So women aren't necessarily getting chosen for those opportunities. When women are assertive, women get pushed back, right? They're told not to be pushy. Oh, that wasn't very nice. No. Women's behavior is policed a lot. And a lot of the time you need to be more direct, more assertive. You need to be a little bit more comfortable with not being liked in order to grow into whatever leadership level is right for you. And by the way, there are a lot of ways. You don't just have to be unlovable to be successful. There are a lot of ways to mitigate that. So there are some nifty tricks around mitigating lack of likability, but you will have to put yourself out there, and women get pushback when they don't conform to the nice nurturer that we expect to see. This is true. This is real, right? And it's so hard when you're trying to grow in your career, to push forward your mission, to face that bias over and over and over and over again. And so there's two directions. Like when you hit that obstacle, I've seen women go in two directions. Direction one is, this sucks, I'm a victim, and it's not possible. And the truth is, if you're going to come out in that direction, I never want to say it's your fault, because it isn't your fault, right? You shouldn't be living in a society that doesn't give you equal opportunities that men do. But from a very pragmatic perspective, if you come out with that mentality, you've kind of given up, right? You've let the other side, and the other side is not men, but the other side is patriarchy, win the battle, and you're losing the opportunity to be the change yourself. The other direction you can go is to say, this is so horrible. I want to be angry. I want to mourn. I want to call friends. I want to be really frustrated. And I want to recognize that the situation is not a good situation. It's not ideal. And I'm going to do what I need to do in order to I need to recognize these feelings and these emotions and recognize it's not just me. And then I'm going to pick myself up and say, well, what do I do about it? So I tried to just, be super assertive in the situation, and I got this pushback. Did I achieve my goal? Did I not? Okay, is there another direction that I'm going to go? Should I try a different advocacy tool? Should I try something different next time? A lot of the women who we see who've grown in their careers, who are doing amazing things, who are making the change for other people, they hit obstacles and then they tried something different. So one of the women who is, I think of her as almost like a patron saint of Build Yourself. Her name's Tamara Roy. She's a principal at a company called Stantec. When she was growing into becoming a principal at her company, one of the challenges was that principal compensation, right, how much you get paid, is based on how much work you bring into the firm. But a lot of her work gets press. A lot of her work gets awards, is written up in design. Some of her work has been in the Boston Globe, and she's got a really public profile. And so one of the things she did, because she, by the way, struggled to have the same client relationships as men, especially if she was doing developer-driven work, because a lot of developers are male, and she found that early in her career, a lot of potential developer clients would hit on her, and she just didn't want to do that. She found two workarounds. One is she started to specialize in more institutional clients, right? So if this client base isn't going to work, what's plan B? What's my plan B? And number two, she advocated for principal compensation to also be based on design, exposure, thought leadership, press and publicity, right? These are things that the entire firm benefits from, and it makes it easier for everybody to bring more work into the firm. And so she tried to change the rules. And so you can't change the rules. You can change the rules. I actually believe people at all levels can change the rules, especially if they build alliances with people at other levels of their company or industry. But the more power and influence you gain, the more opportunity you have to change the rules. And being resilient and being a change maker, right? There's a lot of things we want to push for, right? We're living, as Obama says, not in the world that we don't want to, we're in the world that is, but we want to push for the world that should be. And so that, I think a lot of us want to make change in so many ways in our careers, and developing that resiliency, right? This is terrible and I'm going to mourn. And now I'm going to figure out, how do I get there a different way? Maybe get advice from people. How did you get there, right? Maybe look at how other people did it. One of the coaching tools we use is I have people do visual case studies of how other people navigated to certain places in their career and pull out lessons from that. Okay. Fourth limiting belief that I see is if I choose something, then I'm not going to be the full me. So this comes up in a lot of ways. I work with a lot of multi-passionate creatives, and a lot of them, they're trying to work on as many project types as possible, right? Like the idea that they would specialize in, I do cultural institutions. It's like, like that'd be like cutting off an arm. Like I would never be the full me. It also comes up, there's a moment in my coaching program where you've looked at your possible North Star futures, your fake futures, and then I ask you to put a stake in the ground on one of them. I actually am considering buying like little vampire stakes and like sending them to people so that they can like physicalize, like I put my stake in the ground, because A, that moment of choosing, and B, sticking with the choice for enough time to gain some traction on it is really, really hard for a lot of women I work with, especially when your stake in the ground means that you're doing something that scares you, right? You may be looking for a new job, and it means that you have to put yourself out there and informationally interview and ask for opportunities. So when we're doing things that scare us, we face resistance, and that's when we kind of want to get wiggly about the stake in the ground that we've set or the choice that we've made. And a lot of the time, ambivalence, right, being open to all kinds of different things, is actually a self-protection mechanism. It's something that we do in order to, if we don't choose, then we can't fail or be disappointed. So let me tell you, like, here I am, like, blah, 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 here's what you should do with your life, blah. I struggle with this all the time. I am I should be, on a poster for like multi-passionate, right? I was running 2 businesses until recently, right? When I started Build Yourself, I had a kosher pop-up dinner club I was running with someone. I was running a local speaker series for creatives and entrepreneurs. I had Build Yourself. I had a design consultancy, which had like 7 projects in and of itself, right? It was like a Russian doll of multi-passion, right? And so what I found is that telling someone you need to choose exactly what you are for life is really, really scary. But what we need to do is we need to say, here's the choice that I'm making for now, and I'm going to commit to it so I can make progress on it, right? That means committing to working towards your North Star future, and recognizing that along the way you may learn something that helps you adjust it slightly, but you're operating as if that's exactly where you're going, because you will think differently, you'll be more committed, you'll be willing to face the things that scare you if you're really going towards that thing, even if it's slightly a fiction, right? It's a good enough goal, it's not a perfect goal. Cutting things off, right? So a lot of people try to like smoosh everything of who they are into their job, and it's not a helpful thing to do, right? Because when you try to smoosh everything you are, you don't actually make progress on a few key elements. So what I suggest is, and I suggest this both at the scale of your career, but also at the scale of, are you setting goals for a goal you might set for the next 3 months, is to pick a few things, that North Star future, that one goal, and to say, this is what I'm doing for now. And then I will set it aside. I'll work on something else later. And it's okay for not everything to fit. I love to paint. I was trained as a landscape architect, and I was working a lot on urban revitalization projects. And, I was sad to give that up as I went fully into Build Yourself. But so now I've got a creative practice on the side. I don't do it very often, but I'm taking 3 weeks off the summer just to do some painting. And I take an annual Rust Belt road trip. And it doesn't have to be part of who I am professionally. It's allowed to just produce my own happiness. So giving yourself permission to like not be everything at the same time, giving yourself permission to work on a few things at a time and to not have to smoosh everything into who you are. So those are a few of the kind of persistent limiting beliefs that I've seen happen in women. Some of the way that I've worked with, some of the ways that they show up are not choosing, right? Not choosing something and going for it. Sometimes over delivering, right? Doing everything and anything you can because, well, if I'm not a real business owner, if I'm not really good at this, then I'm going to like work extra hard at doing it. And rather than keeping things, working smarter, not harder, right? We work to our insecurities. Another place I see people doing this is avoiding the things that scare them, especially things that involve exposure to other people. Avoiding visibility because you feel like you have to figure it all out before you're going to put your face towards the world, right? And so you think, well, I got to figure it all out, and then I'm going to do a conference presentation, then I'm going to start writing, then I'm going to, etc. Those are a couple of the places that I see it showing up. So a few solutions. Yay! Aren't you glad we got to the solutions part? So a few solutions is, number one, even identifying what your limiting beliefs are is a huge, huge part of the process. So if any of the limiting beliefs that I've covered today, you've been like, ding, 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 like that resonates as true, then take note. And one of the things you can do to take it to the next level is to actually keep a journal for a week, and to record down your inner critic and any times those limiting beliefs, things that ping those limiting beliefs show up. It'll help you understand where they're showing up for you and help you at least get a hold on it. A third thing to do is to list positive evidence in contrast to that limiting belief. So I've got a limiting belief that I'm not a systematic person, right? It's like stayed with me for a long time. And it's like, oh, I'll never be a great business owner because if only I was like, dreaming in spreadsheets, then finally everything would be perfect. So if that's a challenge for you, list positive evidence to the contrary. Even, this is a coaching tool I've had women do. I say, take a Post-it, write down, 5 points to the contrary, stick it in your wallet and take it out when you need it. So for me, it might be, oh, remember that time that I was able to successfully onboard that person. Oh, remember how I built three programs. I'm actually pretty good at this. Remember the time that I XYZ'd, right? So listing positive evidence to the contrary, to push against that belief. And then finally, taking action from a place of being a person without that limiting belief, right? Action in opposition to that belief. So if you think that you are a bad business owner, then what could you do what would a good business owner do, right? It's really hard to go from I'm a bad business owner to I'm a good business owner. I thought it, so it's true. But when you take action from a place of being a good business owner, right? If you take action from a place of not being a victim, right? Not being a victim would be like, I still feel terrible about this, but I'm going to try again and I'm going to try a new strategy. You don't have to magically become the person who's not a victim, but when you start to take action as if, then you start to build that positive evidence up. And action is the only thing that moves us forward, right? Reflection tells us how to act, but action starts to build energy and momentum. Action totally changes the game, right? Action is when we go from something in our mind to something in our body. We build body memory. We build touch points that, oh, even if it didn't work out, I did it differently. Like, I am capable of doing this. So those are a couple of the common limiting beliefs. Those are some of the ways it may show up for you, and also some of the things that you can do with it. So what I urge you to do is pick one strategy to respond to it, and then see how it works in your life. See how things are different with this extra layer of awareness. And if you can, take at least one action, especially an action that scares you.